So today we are going to discuss listening comprehension, its nature, characteristics, and what you as teachers can do with it. Unfortunately, listening has been a neglected area. It has not been adequately exploited in the language class, much less in classes of other subjects. Most of listening that is done is in artificial contexts. So nowadays as a mandatory activity spelt out in the textbooks. And the listening that learners normally and naturally do in the classroom is merely instructions and explanations by the teacher, as we know very well. Focused listening, which is based on different genre, has now sort of made a beginning in some classroom. But the strategies to listen to a particular text is seldom provided. There is no planned or focused listening to content in other subject areas, most definitely. Apart from, of course, teacher talk. And since the entrance tests also concentrate on reading, writing and grammar, so speaking and listening is again neglected. But let's ask this question, why has listening been neglected so far? One, because it is viewed as a passive skill, which is difficult to assess and evaluate. And you know how teachers, we as teachers, we love to assess and evaluate. Then teachers believe that listening activities take up a lot of teaching learning time. So we have to finish our, there's a time constraint, we have to finish the syllabus. So we rather present new language items to the class. And so subject teachers do not focus on listening at all in any conscious way. It's just part of explanation. There is no systematic instruction, there's no evaluation as there is for reading and writing. And a lot of teachers believe that this skill would be automatically picked up through exposure to the target language. And for subject teachers, since the exam entails reading and learning of facts, so they miss out on recorded descriptions, tasks, interviews or discussions which would actually enrich the content. They concentrate primarily on the textbooks. They forget about the other aspects, including debates, including other kind of panel discussions which could be part of the subject matter. Why is listening important? Listening is actually the foundation of literacy during infancy. You know, how do children learn a language? They learn a language just by listening. And that is actually the first vocabulary that any child acquires. The vocabulary of the caregivers, of the other people in the social network. And reading and writing comes much, much later. And there would be actually no language without the oral component and the non-verbal. But this is missed out. This is not considered. And in fact, life itself requires listening. Whether it's your study, it's your work, even if you run businesses or run governments, you just know that listening is very, very important. It is important because of educational excursions that we can take, the interaction with experts, whether when we are watching TV, for example, or YouTube, when we are watching, when you're listening to professionals who come, it's very, very important. Then how do you pick up the vocabulary and patterns of spoken language? You know, unless you listen, because remember, spoken discourse is very different from written language. Then formulaic language, you know, may I help you? Ma'am, can I go to the washroom? This kind of language, the polite language, the formulaic language, which is actually part of a culture of a language, is only picked up through listening. New grammatical structures, when a speaker uses expressions, that is also picked up via listening. New vocabulary is picked up, especially when you talk about language across the curriculum, which is from different subjects, science, physics, which is technical, picked up again through listening. New phonological patterns. Also, what are the permissible combination of sounds Do you say school, or do you say school, or do you say school? This is also picked up through listening. And then, of course, pragmatic information, which is, your stress, your tone. Are you angry or are you calm? Your body language. All this is part of this whole business of listening. So, listening is basic to oral skills. And we have two ways of looking at it. Of course, the fluency part of it, when we pay attention to keywords, use non-linguistic cues by attending to visual signs. You pay attention to physical movements, and then you arrive at meaning making. And then you have accuracy, which is the ability to decode pieces of connected speech. Noticing word boundaries, for example, understanding this whole business of prefixes and suffixes. So what should the goal be? So when we teach listening, we should of course have to concentrate on pronunciation, the ability to discriminate between sounds and utterances. Modeling. For example, we know that it has to be I am, wheel in connected speech. We say, I like him for breakfast. I like him for breakfast. It was a good movie. So how language is spoken, you get through listening. Then if you're talking about history, how do you obtain facts? What is the sequence of facts? What is the chronology? All through listenings. Also, when we're teaching language, we have to pay attention to different things like what is the difference between talks, interviews, formal interactions. What happens when we say at the outset? And when do we say, I would like to welcome so and so? So all this is part of language teaching. Or when you think about pragmatic input. For example, when you begin something with, I'm afraid. Are you really afraid? Or are you expressing dissatisfaction, warning, complaint? Or when you're using evasive language. So all this is when we listen to people. And then of course, when we don't understand, when we give feedback that we've missed the main idea. So you say, what I really mean was, or what did you really mean? All this happens in the listening process. And this has to be taught. Now, what are the learner concerns? The learner concerns are that they do not have concrete evidence that they are making progress in the skill. Because how does the teacher evaluate? That's a big problem, which we have to sort out. And that listening happens in real time, which means that it is supposed to be understood at the moment in order to make a suitable response. One cannot play it back in one's mind to decipher its meaning. So that becomes a little problematic for learners. So learners also sort of hesitate. Then they haven't learned to separate the grain from the chaff. So that is that they haven't, they have not been taught the difference between a fact and an opinion, between expressions, do not have the ability to focus on keywords. They have little practicing in noticing the strong and weak forms of words. For example, I want to go to Bombay. So you don't say, I want to go to Bombay or Mumbai. So you don't say, I want to go to Mumbai. You say, I want to go to Mumbai. I want to go to Mumbai. So what is the strong form and what is the weak form? They have to be taught that, and this is their concern, because when they read, they will say, I want to go to Mumbai, instead of, I want to go to Mumbai. So there is a need for modeling good listening behavior. As teachers, we should put aside any other work and pay attention to the child. Make a note of significant points and ask questions to clarify, or repeat to confirm if that is what the child meant, to show that you're registering what the child is saying. Make eye contact with the child, ask questions to clarify, allow the child to complete what he or she is saying without interrupting, and then ask your questions. Then, of course, in learning across the curriculum, we know that different subjects offer varied contexts that could involve discussion, comparison and contrast, descriptions, making inferences, arguing, recounting, explaining, and so on. So, for all this, listening is very important. And we know that language contributes to cognitive development. So, it requires new concepts, it requires the ability to activate one's schema so that we are able to make association with what one already knows. And of course, new discourse behaviors when we are introduced to new subjects, to different subjects. And that really helps. So the processes are decoding, that is analyzing what is this speech signal, and meaning making. That is, how do you build meaning by bringing in outside knowledge? So the decoding process that happens at the phoneme level, the syllable level, the word form level, the phrase level, also syntactic, and of course, intonation of course, and then of course the meaning level. And that is followed by the response of the listener. So the listener has to decode all this kind of information and then respond. So we'll talk about the micro and the macro skills in listening. So perception skills are when you recognize different individual sounds, you are able to discriminate between pet and pat, for instance. You're able to understand connected speech. I just gave the example of I want to go to Mumbai. Then it is stress syllables like photograph and photography, and stress patterns. They're planning to go on a holiday. So they're planning, go, holiday is stress. Then intonation patterns. Won't you join us? I'm so sorry. Are you angry with me? That's in the rising tone. Or the train was late. Write as soon as you can. What time are you leaving? The falling tone. These are things that the listener needs to understand and so needs practice. Then, as micro skills, we have language skills. That is when we identify words and phrases and construct meanings from them. Or we identify discourse markers. For example, how do you organize the ideas in a text? Do you use things like then, as a matter of fact, to reiterate, to conclude, however. Macro skills. This is using language of the world. So where you're connecting groups of words to non-linguistic features such as expressions, gestures, objects in order to get clues to meaning. To using your previous knowledge of the topic to guess what the speaker might be saying. Using knowledge patterns of social interaction in order to predict the meaning. For example, how do you order food in a restaurant? How do you make a telephone call? Then dealing with information. Have you understood the gist? Have you understood the main points and how they're related to each other, the subpoints? Have you understood details? Have you understood even information which is not explicitly stated? Then you have to understand the speaker. You have to cope with the variation among speakers, that is the speed of delivery or accent. Recognize the speaker's intentions. Recognize the mood of the speaker, the attitude of the speaker. Recognize the spoken cues, such as when is your turn to speak? Or when is your turn? Maybe you can change the topic. Or to predict what the speaker will say next. Then as teachers, we need to know about all these various types of listening. Passive or marginal listening, which often happens in the classroom. Sometimes when the children are not paying attention or they're bored. Attentive listening, when they need to take down notes, exams are coming near and they're really very conscious. Responsive listening, when you want them to answer. Selective listening. Okay, I need to only pick out, I'm taking notes, so I need to pick out just the best points. You're listening to a poem, appreciative listening. You're listening to create because you want to create something more. So you're listening to what the teacher is saying, and maybe you have to write a different ending. And then, of course, analytical or critical listening. Teachers need to give the students activities in all these spheres. Then what are the factors that influence listening? Of course, the physical conditions of the students, like hearing problems, or they're tired, they're ill, the temperature is bad, you're sweating, there's noise in the environment, or the mannerisms of the teacher. Is she running her hands through the hair? Is she smoothing her clothes? Is she repeating the phrases too often so it's boring? Then psychological factors. It could be boredom, lack of interest, improper attitude towards the school and the teacher. And then, of course, prejudice and misconception about the topic. Then experiential background. We all grow out of our pleasant or unpleasant experiences. So these sometimes lead to lack of interest. It leads to some kind of an antagonistic attitude, which might have grown out of unhappy experiences. So this also influences our listening. And then, of course, the listening vocabulary. Do we have enough vocabulary to be able to understand what the speaker is saying? So let's give you an activity now, which you could use with your students. And this is again across the curriculum, but can be used by the language class teacher or by the history teacher. Read a comparison between the Mohenjo-daro and Harappa civilizations and indicate the similarities and differences and unique characteristics of each. And then you can have them talk about the general description, geographical position, architecture, health and hygiene, sculpture, economy, science, whether there was any religion, artifacts, and so on. Another activity which the language class teacher could, which is give a lot of texts with different discourse functions and ask them to match with whether they're describing, reporting, naming, defining, explaining, exemplifying. So this is both a language activity and across the curriculum kind of activity. So they have to talk about the text as well as the subject. A really interesting activity which all teachers could have in their classroom. Then when you plan tasks, what do you have to take into account? You have to take into account the interests of the children, attention span. Give very clear instructions. What is your role? And then remove distracting objects which might take away from the listening activity. Background sounds should be minimized also. Make the children sit comfortably, informally. Each child should be within a reasonable distance from the speaker or the source of the sound. And the children should be told that they are expected to remain seated during the course of the listening activity. Not to interrupt. Children should be told not to interrupt. And it's only after the recording that they can speak. And then, of course, we all know about the phases of a listening lesson. The pre-listening activities, where you prime the students, the while listening, and the post-listening, where you do extension activities and discussion. So in the pre-listening stage, what do? You set the physical arrangements, you close doors and windows, you introduce the subject briefly, you deal with the vocabulary. This is very important because if students cannot understand the vocabulary, they cannot do the activity. Ensure that all the children have their worksheet and define the task very clearly. Then in the while listening, see that everybody is doing the task. There is no disturbance made by the students. And in the post listening, you may need to replay your CD or cassette or whatever you're using, or you may use the blackboard for the students to complete the activity. So what is the role of the teacher? We've talked about it. Check the quality of the laptop, CD, pre-position all this material, see about the seating arrangement, plan on reading aloud in case there is a power failure. And of course, we have to think of integrating listening, speaking, reading, writing, everything. So this should be done if we use a listening passage to input any other activity. Or the listening activity can be used as a stimulus for a reading task or a writing task. Thank you.